Chapter 3 Battle in Space. In the middle of the word, the radio man's clear, precisely spaced enunciation became a hideous drooling, a slobbering, meaningless mumble. Martin stared into his plate in amazement. The communications officer of Martin's ship, the Washington, had slumped down loosely into his seat, as though his every bone had turned into a rubber string. His tongue lolled out limply between slack jaws, his eyes protruded, his limbs jerked and twitched aimlessly. Every man visible in the plate was similarly affected. The entire communications staff was in the same pitiable condition of utter helplessness. But Ferdinand Stone did not stare. A haze of livid light had appeared, gnawing viciously at his spherical protective screen, and he sprang instantly to his instruments. "I can't say that I expected this particular development, but I know what they are doing and I am not surprised," Stone said coolly. "They have discovered the fault band and are broadcasting such an interference on it that no human being not protected against it can think intelligently. There, I have expanded our zone to cover the whole ship. I hope that they don't find out for a few minutes that we are immune, and I don't think they can, as I have so adjusted the screen that it is now absorbing instead of radiating. Tell the captain to put the ship into heaviest possible battle order and everything full on as soon as the men can handle themselves. Then I want to make a few suggestions." "What happened anyway?" the communications officer, semi-conscious now, was demanding. "Something hit me and tore my brain all apart. I couldn't think, couldn't do a thing. My mind was all chewed up like curly pinwheels." Throughout the vast battleship of space, men raved briefly in delirium, but, the cause removed, recovery was rapid and complete. Martin explained matters to the captain, that Worthy issued orders, and soon the flagship had in readiness all her weapons, both of defense and of offense. "Dr. Stone, who knows more about the automatons than does any other human being, will tell us what to do next," the flight director said. "The first thing to do now is to locate them," Stone, now temporary commander, stated crisply. "They have taken over at least one of our vessels, probably one close to us, so as to be near the center of the formation. Radio room, put out traces on waypoint 00271. He went on to give exact and highly technical instructions as to the tuning of the detectors. "We found them, sir," soon came the welcome report. "One ship, the Dresden, coordinates 427963. "That makes it bad, very bad," Stone reflected audibly. "We can't expand the zone to release another ship from the control of the robots without enveloping the Dresden and exposing ourselves. Can't surprise them, they're ready for anything. It's rather long range too." The vessels of the fleet were 1,000 miles apart, being in open order for high-velocity flight in open space. Torpedoes would be thrown off by her meteorite deflectors. "Only one thing to do, Captain. Close in and tear into her with everything you've got." "But the men in her!" protested Martin. "Dead long ago," snapped the expert. "Probably been animated corpses for days. Take a look if you want to. Won't do any harm now. Radio, put us on as many of the Dresden's television plates as you can. Besides, what's the crew of one ship compared to the hundreds of thousands of men in the rest of the fleet? We can't burn her out at one blast anyway. They've got real brains and the same armament we have, and will certainly kill the crew at the first blast, if they haven't done it already. Afraid it'll be a near thing getting away from them. Getting away from the sun, even with 11 other ships to help us." He broke off as the beam operators succeeded in making connection briefly with the plates of the Dresden. One glimpse, then the visibeams were cut savagely, but that glimpse was enough. They saw that their sister ship was manned completely by automatons. In her every compartment, men, all too plainly dead, lay wherever they had chanced to fall. The captain swore a startled oath, then bellowed orders, and the flagship, driving projectors fiercely aflame, rushed to come to grips with the Dresden. "You intimated something about help," Martin suggested. "Can you release some of the other ships from the automaton's yoke after all?" "Got to, or roast. This is bound to be a battle of attrition. We can't crush her screens alone until her power is exhausted, and we'll be in the sun long before then. I see only one possible way out. We'll have to build a neutralizing generator for every lifeboat this ship carries, and send each one out to release one other ship in our fleet from the robot's grip. 11 boats. That'll make 12 to concentrate on her. About all that could attack at once, anyway. That way will take so much time, it will certainly be touch and go, but it's the only thing we can do as far as I can see. Give me 10 good radio men and some mechanics and we'll get at it. While the technicians were coming on the run, Stone issued final instructions. Attack with every weapon you can possibly use. Try to break down the Dresden's meteorite shields, so that you can use our shells and torpedoes. Burn every gram of fuel that your generators will take. Don't try to save it. The more you burn, the more they'll have to. And the quicker we can take them. We can refuel you easy enough from the other vessels if we get away. Then, while Stone and his technical experts laboured upon the generators of the screens which were to protect 11 more of the gigantic vessels against the fort-destroying radiations of the automatons, and while the computers calculated minute by minute the exact progress of the fleet towards the blazing sun, the flagship Washington drove in upon the rebellious Dresden, her main forward battery furiously aflame. Drove in until the repeller screens of the two vessels locked and buckled. Then Captain Malcolm really opened up. That grizzled four-striper had been at a loss, knowing little indeed of the oscillatory nature of thought and still less of the abstruse mathematics in which Ferdinand Stone took such delight. But here was something he understood thoroughly. He knew his ship, he knew her every weapon and her every whim, knew to the final volt and to the ultimate ampere her gargantuan capacity both to give it and to take it. He could fight his ship, and how he fought her. From every projector that could be brought to bear there flamed out against the Dresden beams of an energy and of a potency indescribable. At those whose salient areas of contact the defensive screens of the robot-manned cruiser fled into terribly resplendent brilliance. Every type of lethal vibratory force was hurled upon every usable destructive frequency. Needle rays and stabbingly penetrant stilettos of fire thrust and thrust again. Sizzling, flashing planes cut and slashed, the heaviest annihilating and disintegrating beams generable by man clawed and tore in wild abandon. And over all and through all the stupendously powerful blanketing beams, so furiously driven that the coils and commutators of their generators fairly smoked, and at the refractory throats of their projectors glared radiantly violet and began slowly, stubbornly, to volatilize, raved out in all their pyrotechnically incandescent might, striving prodigiously to crush by their sheer power the shielding screens of the vessel of the automatons. Nor was the vibratory offensive alone. Every gun, primary or auxiliary, that could be pointed out at the Dresden was vomiting smoke, and flame and shrouded steel as fast as automatic loaders could serve it. And under that continuous, appallingly silent concussion, the giant frame of the flagship shuddered and trembled in every plate and member. And from every launching tube there were streaming the deadliest missiles known to science, radio-dirigible torpedoes, which, looping in vast circles to attain the highest possible measure of momentum, crashed against the Dresden's meteorite deflectors in Herculean efforts to break them down. And, in failing to do so, exploded and filled all space with raging flame and with flying fragments of metal. Captain Malcolm was burning his stores of fuel and munitions at an appalling rate, careless alike of exhaustion of reserves and of service life of equipment. All his generators were running at a shockingly ruinous overload. His every projector was being used so mercilessly that not even their powerful refrigerators radiating the transported heat into the interplanetary cold from the dark side of the ship could keep their refractory linings in place for long. And through raging beam, through blasting ray, through crushing force, through storm of explosive and through rain of metal, the Dresden remained apparently unscathed. Her screens were radiating high into the violet, but they showed no signs of weakening or of going down. Neither did the meteorite deflectors break down, everything held. Since she was armed as capably as was the flagship and was being fought by inhumanly intelligent monstrosities, she was invulnerable to any one ship of the fleet as long as her generators could be fed. Nevertheless, Captain Malcolm was well content. He was making the Dresden burn plenty of irreplaceable fuel, and his generators and projectors would last long enough. His ship, his men, and his weapons could and would carry the load until the fresh attackers should take it over. And carry it they did. Carried it while Stone and his overdriven crew finished their complicated mechanisms and flew out into space toward the 11 nearest battleships of the fleet. They carried it while the computers, grim-faced and scowling now, jotted down from minute to minute the enormous and rapidly increasing figure representing their radial velocity. Carried it while Earth's immense armada, manned by creatures incapable of even the simplest coherent thought or purposeful notion, plunged sickeningly downward into its madly hopeless fall, with scarcely a measurable trace of tangential velocity, toward the unimaginable inferno of the sun. Eventually, however, the shielded lifeboats approached their objectives and expanded their screens to enclose them. Officers recovered, airlocks opened, and the lifeboats, still radiating protection, were taken inside. Explanations were made, orders were given, and one by one the 11 vengeful super dreadnoughts shot away to join their flagship in abating the menace of the machine. No conceivable structure, however armed or powered, could long withstand the fury of the combined assault of 12 such superb battlecraft, and under the awful concentration of force of the screens of the doomed ship radiated higher and higher into the ultraviolet, went black and failed. And those mighty defences down, the end was practically instantaneous. Not unprotected metal can endure even momentarily the ardour of such beams, and they played on. Not only until every plate and girder of the vessel and every nut, bolt and rivet of its monstrous crew had been blasted out of all semblance to what it had once been, but until every fragment of metal had not only been liquefied, but had been completely volatilized. At the instant of cessation of the brain-scrambling activities of the automatons, the communications officer had begun an insistent broadcast. Aboard all of the ships there were many who did not recover, who would be helpless imbeciles during the short period of life left to them. But soon an intelligent officer was at every control, and each unit of the terrestrial contingent was exerting its maximum thrust at a right angle to its line of fall. And now the burden was shifted from the fighting staff to the no less able engineers and computers. To the engineers, the task of keeping their mighty engines in such tune as to maintain constantly the peak acceleration of free Earth gravities. To the computer, that of so directing their ever-changing course as to win every possible centimetre of precious tangential velocity.